Greetings. I'm Steve Cook, Superintendent of the Benton Pine Schools. It's Tuesday, March 8th, 2022, and this is your summary for tonight's board meeting. A little bit of a long meeting. We got out at a little after 8 o'clock. A lot of action happening tonight. I want to start off with, first off, mentioning our two Champions for Students awards. It was a great celebration, an opportunity to celebrate two of our great staff. The first one, Amber Lynn, one of our math coaches, received the Presidential Award in Math and Science. And it was just fantastic to celebrate that award for her. That's a national award. There's no other recipients in the state of Oregon that received that award this year. And so it was a great opportunity to celebrate her. Our second award, as you may know, this is Classified Appreciation of Classified Employees Week, and we were excited to celebrate our very own Lapine Middle School kitchen manager, Mickey Morris, and what a great celebration that was, and just the work she's doing for our students in Lapine Middle School to create just nutritional options and choices for them, having a salad bar and fresh fruit and vegetables available for them every single day. So many great comments about her work in that school, and great opportunity for us to celebrate her today as well. As we moved in, consent agenda was moved through with no interest, just passed right through. Our first item of interest was the board had a responsibility to respond to a complaint filed to the board, with the board. That complaint was numbered 10-04021. The board voted that no further action was necessary after reviewing that formalized complaint. Second thing was my report. The next was my report, the superintendent's report. I talked about two things today, and the two things I talked about, the first one was the RSSL changes that came down in the last week or so from the State Department. Pretty big changes in that guidance, and so a couple of key points on that. The first one is that March 12th is when the mandatory mask mandate expires for our schools. So that means Monday the 14th, when students come back to school next week. Some students will be choosing to mask. Some students will be choosing not to mask. And how does that look? Additionally, students will not be required to wear a mask on the buses. I also mentioned that the staff that submitted exceptions rather than their vaccination records for us, there's about 180 of our staff have availed themselves of that opportunity, would also not be required to mask. They will still be required to continue the weekly testing, but would not be required to mask. Volunteers are starting to come back into our buildings. Quarantining is no more because contract tracing is no more. And we talked a little bit about that with the board. We are still going to continue to isolate students and staff. Remember, isolation means you've tested positive with COVID and you're expected to be out for 5 days, allowed to return back into your respective roles or positions, whether you're students or staff, if you wear a mask on day 6 through 10. And last but not least, I think it's important for us to just remember that when we come back to school and we've got some people in masks and some people not in masks, to just be kind to one another and just to try to get away from a mask signaling something or meaning something, or not wearing a mask signaling something or meaning something. It's going to be a different day as we try to move into hopefully this next stage of the pandemic, and start to move beyond masks meaning something other than a personal decision. And so I would just ask all of us to consider, how can we be inclusive and create a sense of belonging in each of our schools and each of our departments as people avail themselves of whatever that choice might be. Second part of my report was about early literacy, and I was excited to share that we're speeding up, if you will, and separating the foundations in literacy piece, and going to try and do an adoption process and have that ready to go for next fall. That means we're doing a community a quicker community engagement process. And so we've had some folks participating and giving us some feedback on the most appropriate curricular adoptions for us to consider as we do that process, and just celebrated how much early literacy has been a priority for our school district and has been so for quite some time. Glad to share that with you. Probably the highlight of the night, short of our celebrations for our students or Champions for Students, was a presentation regarding the the update from the Safe and Healthy and Equitable Schools presentation put on by some of our schools, and the work that we're doing to share our student success plans and interventions in our schools, how the BRIGHT program exists in each of our 33 schools, and all the additional staffing that we've added, over 60 staff members, to help both in those rooms, to help Tier 2 and Tier 3 students kind of learn skills on how to re-regulate and get themselves back in the classroom. That was so inspirational to hear testimony from our staff and from our building leaders about the impact of that work. Additionally, Eric did a nice job of sharing the work of restorative practices in our schools and how taking the punitive approach to students' behavior isn't always the only choice we have, but how we can work to build those connections back, and when somebody's been wronged, if you will, restoring those relationships and the impact that that's having on many of our schools and many of our students. That work's inspiring as well. We've got great partnership with Restorative Justice Group, and the Community Cadre Group are helping us in each of our schools, and we're excited about that. Elk Meadows, Pilot Butte both did great presentations on how all of that work is coming to fruition in their schools. Then I did a presentation that's kind of the kickoff presentation to the budget process. It's called the Strategic Priorities Workshop. Long story short, focusing to continue on our excellence and equity work, meeting those needs and how we're going to take the priorities work that we're currently doing and expand those and continue the work in areas that we still need more attention, and how we're going to better serve our historically underserved populations, and how that informs our budget process. It felt perfect timing to have that follow right after the work that we presented with the student success interventions work, because those are expenditures that were budgetarily decided by the previous board to make sure that we are committing those new FTE to support students in our schools in that fashion. Great example of how those funds can be utilized for student success. So long story short, presentation about those priorities, how they inform the budget process, and what's next for this, and how we intend to build our budget based on a flat enrollment for next year. I think will be what you'll hear from Brad and Leah and team in the upcoming future. That means we're going to have to do some right sizing, which means some fewer positions in our district. We're not going to cut anybody's position. We don't anticipate that we're going to be doing any kind of riffing or anything like that. We're pretty confident we can manage this through attrition and staffing decisions like resignations and retirements. So look for that conversation to continue. Then we went into board policies. There's one policy that's currently still under revision, the policy ACBBP, Every Student Belongs. We've got a lot of feedback on that policy, so we're continuing to work on that. We'll bring that back in front of the board probably next month. Then we did a presentation to the board about continuing or reopening, if you will, for in-person participation with our community for board meetings. Janet Bojanowski did a really nice job of presenting the purpose of board meetings and why we have those in our community, what we're legally bound to, what we're not legally bound to, and how that could be considered as we start to move out of potentially the masking conversation into what would it look like to open our meetings back to in-person attendance, with some like sign-ups and people having seats that we have limited seating. Maybe we could hold about 50, and what that process would look like. The board was supportive, and so we're going to be working on allowing processes to allow in-person participation and observation and attendance of our April 12th board meeting. So we're excited about that. We're going to start bringing folks back in. And then we had 5 policies, administrative policies, that we reviewed, and 2 of them that were already being reviewed that are continuing to be reviewed. And I'll just briefly go through those: the criminal records check and fingerprinting, the choice option schools and programs, the attendance areas and in-district transfers, volunteers in schools, volunteer criminal history records check, and visitors to district facilities. Those 5 new ones will be going out for public review and public comment. We'll be accepting public comment on those for about 2.5 weeks. So look for that in the communication. If you have comments or thoughts you'd like to give us on those, please do so. And so that, I think, is it. We had a couple of comments with board comments, and we adjourned at a little after 8 o'clock. And so there's your summary for tonight's board meeting. I'm Steve Cook. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next month.